So that does sound a little bit like a Ponzi scheme because we use illusory results to lure new investors. That's what a Ponzi scheme is. And they don't seem to pay the price for it. If the investments aren't very good, it doesn't seem that these fund managers are out of a job afterward.
Dr. Emmanuel Maggiori, a software engineer specializing in artificial intelligence, recently published Silicon: How the Tech Industry Solves Fake Problems, Hoards Idle Workers, and Makes Doomed Bets with Other People's Money. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Emmanuel Maggiori.
Thank you for having me.
So this is our second podcast that we're doing. About 9 months ago, we had you on for a book that you wrote called Smart Until It's Dumb: Why Artificial Intelligence Keeps Making Epic Mistakes and Why the AI Bubble Will Burst. And we started that podcast talking about how you basically wrote a blog where you basically said that you didn't do any work, even though you worked for a prestigious company in the tech space. I believe it was an investment bank. And you were like, one of the AI specialists in this investment bank. And you said that you worked maybe 3 hours in 5 months total. You wrote a blog post. You had a lot of people kind of contact you about this blog post. And now your new book, again, the title, Silicon: How the Tech Industry Solves Fake Problems, Hoards Idle Workers, and Makes Doomed Bets with Other People's Money, is the outgrowth of that article. So let's just start there.
Yeah, of course. I didn't think I would write a book about this, to be honest. I was venting when I wrote that blog article. I'd been employed about, almost 6 months by this company, and I had no work to do. And it wasn't something that I wanted. It's not like I didn't want to work. I'm a nerd. A lot of people in my field, we're nerds. We want to use mathematics, coding to build useful products that people will use. It's not that we want to sit there pretending that we work. And it wasn't the only time. So that happened to me a few times, getting a job where I'm not working, nobody's working around me. Also, my friends working in tech, they were not really working. They were employed in tech, but a lot of them were doing nothing. I started to see this, happen around me. And I thought, someone needs to say this. People from the outside need to know what's going on. And I suspected that something was wrong with the industry because this can be sustainable, right, in time. You can't afford to hire so many people to do nothing. And I also had the impression that there's just too much money in this field, so people can afford to splurge. They can afford to, let's hire 70 people because we think AI is cool, so let's just create an AI team of 70 people. We don't know what we're going to do with them, but let's just hire them. If you remember, there were massive layoffs in the tech industry. We're talking 80% of people were fired from Twitter, for example. So something was quite wrong with the industry. How can a company still run with only 10% or 20% of its people, right? And when I was so frustrated, and I couldn't really speak about that with people because they tell you, what do you complain about? You have a job, you're paid a lot, because you're working tech, so you have a good salary, but you aren't doing much. So why do you complain? You sound like Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, one of my friends told me. So, you're in a good position and you complain. But at one point, I don't even know what came over me. I was very frustrated. I decided to quit that job. And I felt the world needs to know. And I remember going to this cafe nearby just to write this article, thinking that I just wanted it out there. I want someone to say it. I didn't think it would go viral. I didn't think people would actually read it. It was more, I just wanted to be documented, right? Because someone one day may want to know stories of what happened. And I published it and everybody went crazy. I got hundreds of messages of people telling me that they were in the same situation, telling me that they were very unhappy about not working. Actually, it's not like, I'm scuba diving around the world. I'm actually sitting in an office or walking around at home pretending that I work or waiting until there's work to come. But also a lot of these people, they actually wanted to build a product that was useful, that other people loved. That's what you want to work for, not just to pay the bills. And they were very frustrated. some people were so frustrated, they just emailed me to say, can I share my story with you? Yes, of course, share it with me. And what happened after that article went viral was that I thought I want to do some research into what happened in the tech industry to get to that point. And I started speaking with lots of people, with investors, with venture capitalists, with entrepreneurs, with economists. And there were a few common themes. Some people spoke about interest rates, low interest rates a lot. Some like, maybe there's something in there. Some people mentioned all of these methodologies that are very trendy in the field, like agile or lean, kind of causing this idleness or concealing the idleness. And then just a book came out of this, right? I was thinking, I thought I need to put some order to all my thoughts and summarize them into a book. And here we are.
You started out your book, Silicon, talking about the day in the life of a Twitter employee. Was it a TikTok video that went viral? I believe it was TikTok, or maybe it was...
I think it was TikTok. Yeah, this girl. Yeah, day in my life of the Twitter office. Yeah.
Right, where basically is that she starts her day out getting a coffee or a latte or whatever, and then
she goes to the meditation room, and then, and then she was so overwhelmed when she saw what the food was like in the cafeteria. She got a wine, which is on tap, and then she went to the terrace to enjoy the weather.
Welcome to a day in my life as a Twitter employee. So this past week, went to SF for the first time at a Twitter office, badged in. Honestly, took a moment to just soak everything in. What a blessing. Also started my morning off with an iced matcha from the perch. Then I had a meeting, so quickly scheduled one of these little pod rooms, which were so cool. They're literally noise canceling. Took my meeting, got ready for lunch. Look how delicious this food looks. Oh my goodness, I was so overwhelmed. Then made my way down to this log cabin area. I don't know what this is.
Yeah,
but...
actually, Elon Musk announced he was laying off 75% of the workforce, I think a few days after that happened. I don't know if it was related, but it was about the same time that Elon Musk was, I'm firing a lot of people in this company. We saw that this girl wasn't really doing much.
Well, I think it was within 2 weeks, 75% of Twitter was let go. But then, like you mentioned, months later, around 90% of the staff has been let go. And as a user, I don't think any user notices a different experience. So the question is essentially, were 90% of the employees useless?
I don't know. Maybe a lot of them were working on experimental features to potentially add in the future. Elon Musk said a lot of them were kind of a censorship kind of force within the company. So, but then it wasn't just Twitter, right? A lot of companies laid off a lot of people. Most of them, right? Facebook, Google, they've all fired a lot of people at the same time. But when I published this article on my blog and it went viral, a lot of people started to fight against each other about what I said. Is it true? How is this possible? A lot of people didn't believe it, but others pointed out it must be at least to some extent true, because how can a company like Twitter fire so many people and still run, right? So there must be some truth to this idea that a lot of people are not doing much in the tech world. Right? I thought that was a validation of what I was saying. I mean, I don't need a validation because I've seen it so much myself, but also a lot of my friends. Look, I know someone who works 2 jobs at the same time, and he's still doing it. He's done it for about 5 years secretly. So none of his employers know about the existence of the other one. And he's very breezy. He's not stressed about it. I wish I was like that, but he's just very breezy, and it's both of them. It's work from home, and he just has both jobs, and it's going very well for him in that sense. So it does happen quite a lot. Yeah, and I think the Twitter story is an example of that. They couldn't have been doing anything too important if you can get away with only running a business with 10% of its people, right?
You basically wrote your article, that blog post, in 2023, and 10 years prior to that, in 2013, David, is it Gruber? How do you pronounce the guy who he basically came up with the whole bullshit jobs? Yeah. But he wrote an essay, kind of like you. He wrote an essay on it. Then he later turned that into a book. And reading some of the comments from that video and just my own personal experience, it seems like it's not just, I mean, your experience is in the tech space, but it's just a lot of industries. I guess the question is, do you think that it's the tech space is maybe worse than other spaces? Like Jordan Peterson in his book, the 12 rules, or is that what it's called? I think it's called the 12.
I think so, yeah.
12 rules for life. He talks about Price's Law in that book, and Price's Law basically says that 50% of the work is done by the square root of the total number of people that participate in that project. And so it's just for people that maybe aren't familiar with the square root. Basically, if you have 100 employees, that means 10 people are essentially doing 50% of the work. And in a previous talk, I saw Jordan Peterson, he says, as your company grows, incompetence grows exponentially, incompetence grows linearly. Do you think the tech sector is like this on steroids, or is this more unique than what? Yeah,
I think it's not unique to tech for sure, but I think there are some aggravating factors. That's one of the things I wanted to study in my book. Is there anything in tech that makes it worse? And I think there are some ways in which it's easier to get away with it, because not just to get away with it, because it's not done on purpose. Sometimes, a lot of companies find themselves in this position. But I think there are many reasons. One of them is the whole, tech industry receives a lot of money from other people, right? Other people's money. So it's managers of money that give money to other companies. So there are many layers of removing your own responsibility, if you want, from that, or your misalignment of incentives. And the amount of money the tech sector received until 2021, before it collapsed, is insane, right? So we're talking in 2021, there were 700 new unicorns that year. So it's billion-dollar companies, or companies assessed to be billion-dollar companies by investors. So we're talking 2 new unicorns a day. That's absolutely insane. How can that be possible? How can that be real, that in a year you produce 2 new billion-dollar companies every day? So obviously there's been a little bit too much money through these valuations given to companies. They can't all be worth that much. So I think there is this fascination with tech. Some of it is warranted, right? Because companies like Uber have grown really quickly, even though it hasn't really made a profit yet, or consecutive quarters, profitable quarters in a row. But it's a company that grew really quickly. You have examples like Facebook or MailChimp, and I think that attracts a lot of money. And it's very easy also to sell what you're doing to business people who don't know how that works. So I think that's another thing with tech. When you tell someone, we're going to build this amazing AI-based product, we need 70 people in a team for it, they don't know what it takes to build an AI-based product. Business people don't know the technicalities of how it works. And that's why I said, I think in my article, my blog article, if a barber tells you, this is how long it takes to cut someone's hair, everybody kind of knows whether that's true or not, because you've had a haircut. You know what happens when you get a haircut. But with tech, if I tell you this is what we've been doing, by the past month, outsiders don't really know what's going on, right? So it's much more obscure, and I think that's another reason for how much this happens in tech and not necessarily in other fields as much.
One of the things that you talked about in the book was this whole agile, or Scrum. Basically, was it somewhere, I think it was in 2001 in Utah at a ski resort. You had these software developers that got together, didn't want to do waterfall anymore, and wanted to change. But then in the comments of the video that you mentioned, the AI video that our last podcast we did together, and in your book, you're basically like, people are saying like, oh, like if like agile is basically perfect, like if it's not working for you, you're just not implementing it properly. Yeah. And one of the themes is that it really seemed to the tech space is just like they treat the workers like kids. It's like the Googleplex. I mean, it's designed after a university setting. Let's get the beanbags and
play games, or hold a plank on the floor. Just get on the floor doing your plank, like the abs exercise. while you're speaking at a meeting, so that you try to keep it short, right? So you can only speak while you hold your plank. So that's infantilizing the workforce, I think. Yeah, and there's a lot of that. So I think the agile problem is that a lot of people have taken a certain recipe, or there's a principle like agile. I think the principles behind agile are actually pretty good. We should follow those principles probably when we develop software. We need to adapt quickly to change. We can't plan an entire product in advance because clients often don't really know what they want, or things change very quickly with technology. So that's what the principles of agile are like, right? When you build a bridge, you can usually, plan the whole bridge in advance, and you need to before you start building it. With software, it's a lot more effective when you build it little by little, and in between you deliver. If you want a version of the product that is, even if it's only basic functionality, it's better to deliver it to the client, get feedback, and then continue update. That's what agile says. But a lot of people thought in the tech sector, how can we create a recipe that's going to make you be agile? And I think that's the problem, that a few recipes appeared and everybody tried to follow them to the letter, almost in a religious way, right? So if you say, this isn't working for me, like what you said before, if this is not working for me, people tell you, you're the problem. It's not the recipe, right? You're not following it strictly enough. That's why I said in my blog, it's like communism. It's never worked because nobody has implemented it correctly, right? And that's the way they treat these recipes. And one of the things that these recipes say is that you should meet every morning. The whole team needs to meet every morning to discuss what you've done the day before, what you're going to do today, and if you have any blockers. And that doesn't work for every team all the time. In my case, I've actually, a few times, I think it's been justified to meet every day where we were deploying maybe a critical piece of software, right? We needed to monitor that everything was going well and we hadn't broken anything. But then other times, it just became a box-ticking exercise. We just meet every day, you speak, then you don't listen, you play with your phone the rest of the time. And that's when people try to keep the meeting short by making people exercise in the meeting. There are all these, let's pass it a stick around, and there are lots of strategies. Another thing, and this is also what I think has made people not work much, is that every 2 weeks you meet to plan what you're going to do over those 2 weeks, right? Which in theory sounds great, but it also becomes a box-ticking exercise. And during this meeting, you play a game called planning poker, where every task is discussed by everyone in the team, and people need to vote on the difficulty of the task using a special system. They even sell you the cards, the physical cards. You can buy them on Amazon. You just buy the planning poker deck, and people play with the cards literally. And everybody casts a vote on every task difficulty, right? And because they try to create a production line of software, if you want, which is a little bit the opposite of agile. So we want it to be flexible, but now we want to predict how long things are going to take, so that every 2 weeks we kind of know what we're going to deliver. So they're trying to bring predictability. What happens is that people overestimate the length of the tasks. That's what I've noticed, because you kind of commit. And in theory, yeah, you could change along the way. During the 2 weeks, you can say, I finished this faster and pick a new task. I think what happens in practice is that people commit to, this, and I've seen it go wrong really, really badly. Like, a task that takes 2 hours, people say, this is 2 weeks. And I found myself, I know a task is going to land on me because it's the continuation of what I've been working on. And this task, I say I can do this in really easily. So this planning poker session, I vote a difficulty of 1, right? And my colleagues say this is a 5, which means I'll spend the whole 2 weeks doing the task. And then you don't want to be the person telling everyone, but no, this is, so you kind of negotiate and you discuss it. But at the end of the day, I think there's a lot of task bloating, right? So you sacrifice productivity in the name of predictability. And I think that has happened a lot, all of this, the recipe following kind of thing.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of Ross Albright, who is the guy who built Silk Road, the illicit drug market that back, it was like the Amazon of drugs back in the day. Wasn't he like a physicist major? And then he just learned, I think he was a physicist major. He taught himself how to code, built this entire platform by himself in a few months. And then I was reading a book on Silk. I've read a few books on Silk Road, but one of the books is like, it would have taken an entire team of coders years if they did it,
Yeah. And there's overhead, because in this process, you need to split everything into tiny tasks, right? And then you need to speak about the task with everyone, plan the task, and then you speak about the task as you're doing it, because every day you have the daily session. And after the 2-week period, which is called a sprint, you do it's called a retrospective session where you self-reflect about your learnings. And you also have a sprint review session, which lasts like three hours sometimes, where the whole team goes through all the tasks, even the tiniest one, and they discuss the task, sometimes with stakeholders, we've done this, what do you think? It's good to validate the work, but they've taken it to such an extreme that a simple piece of work gets split into 5 different pieces, and then, spoken about much longer than it actually takes to do the task.
Yeah, we talked about David Gruber's bullshit jobs. He has 5 types of pointless jobs, and it seems like in this agile setting, you have the box tickers, which he has a category. You got the task masters. You got the flunkies, which make other people feel important. I mean, it seems like you got the duct tapers.
Okay, yeah.
So it seems like
sounds like Agile has a role for each of those. There's actually a role called the Scrum Master, which is the person within an Agile team that kind of coordinates work. It's making that official. You have a recipe to have bullshit jobs there.
The title of your book is called Silicon: How the Tech Industry Solves Fake Problems, Hoard Idle Workers, and Makes Doomed Bets with Other People's Money is the full title. And basically you ask the question in the book, is Silicon Valley a Ponzi scheme? And you're really talking more about the VC or the venture capitalist. What's the answer to that question? Is Silicon Valley a Ponzi scheme with regards to the VCs?
I think there may be some of that. Yeah. Based on my, the chats I've had with a lot of people, some research, I've done, which is inside the book, but I've spoken even with venture capitalists that think that that's the case themselves. So I can't name names, but it's the case. Look, obviously a Ponzi scheme officially is a specific type of scam. So it's not literally that. But what happens with the venture capital industry is that people these VCs, sometimes they call themselves investors. They say, I'm an investor, but it's not their own money. It's usually other people's money, right? So they raise money from others, and then they decide where to put that money. And in startups, usually tech startups. And they charge a 2% management fee yearly, right? For the money they manage, regardless of results. And a lot of people would say, well, that doesn't matter because the most money they can make is from actually making good investments, because they take a cut of the reward, given to their sources of money, which are called the LPs. So the LPs give money to VCs. VCs give money to startups. When they make a profit, they give that profit to the VC, to the LP, taking a 20% cut on the profit. And that sounds a lot better than the 2% yearly fee they charge. But when you look at results, a lot of these VCs are making a lot of money from management fees, sometimes 500 million a year. And what happens is that these funds are closed. So the VC firm creates the VC fund for a certain amount of money. They close that. Nobody else, can put money into the fund or take money out of it. And then they go and raise another fund, usually 2 years after the previous one. And what some studies have shown is that during the first 2 years of the life of a fund, the performance of the fund that they report to others is very, very high. That's the time they're using those numbers to publicize their performance to others, to raise another round or another fund. But then performance collapses after those 2 years, right? The funds don't perform well. And this doesn't mean they're necessarily lying, but they could be maybe not making such an effort, after the first 2 years, because they've already raised that money. They're making a lot of money from management fees, so that they may want to focus their efforts on a new fund, which brings more management fees as opposed to, properly managing the existing fund. But also a lot of the figures, because startups don't generate any profit for years usually. So these are very often reported. So they are unrealized gains. So over those 2 years of the fund's life, the beginning of these funds, this is a reported calculation of how much we think the company has increased in valuation. And there are different ways of doing this, but some people have questioned the methods. Maybe they exaggerate a little bit, in order to report high figures. So that does sound a little bit like a Ponzi scheme, right? Because it's, we use illusory results to lure new investors. That's what a Ponzi scheme is, right? And they don't seem to, to pay the price for it. If the investments aren't very good, it doesn't seem that these fund managers are out of a job afterward. They've made experience in the field, so they keep working in the field. And also the life of a fund is 10 years, and it's usually extended to 15 years. So it takes a very long time to know if it's working or not. So seems like the perfect crime.
You talked a lot about incentives. People respond to incentives, but it's the whole 2% management fee, 20% carrier, 20% on the profits if those companies eventually become successful. But you mentioned about how over the course of a fund, that 2% management fee basically compounds to about 15% of the total fund, which means if there's $100 million invested in a fund, 15 million of that is going to the VCs,
regardless of performance.
Right. Regardless of performance. And you made the analogy to real estate agents. It would be like, let's say you list your house and the real estate agent is getting paid regardless of if the house is sold or not. Are you going to focus more on selling the house, or are you going to focus more on getting more houses to list? You'd focus more on getting more houses to list than you would on...
Yeah. Obviously, in theory, you could say the agent can make more money from selling your house, But in practice, we're like, I don't know, right? Would you trust a real estate agent that charges you money for listing your house, even if they don't sell it? Yeah, and that's why the way that industry works is that they don't make money unless they sell houses, right? I cite someone in the book that said regarding VC funds something like, well, these guys need to make a living too, right? But the real estate agents do make a living, but that needs to happen after they sell houses, right? We're not paying them when they don't sell. But with the VC industry, they kind of wanted to work in a different way, right? And it's worked this way for a long time. People get paid despite or regardless of performance. And I don't know what a better arrangement could be. There are some ideas. There are people who are suggesting better ways, but I think there could be a misalignment, if you want, of incentives.
So in this book, you're talking about Spotify, how Spotify basically has lost money every year. And you say sometimes Spotify has even lost money in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And then you say, quote, "This was possible thanks to the continued injection of cash from the outside. As of today, other famous unprofitable startups are Uber, Pinterest, Snapchat, Reddit, Fiverr, Lyft, Wayfair, Zillow, Eventbrite, DocuSign, Vroom, Twillo, Deliveroo, Palantir, and Robinhood. These have all lost money every year, or almost every year since they were created." End of your quote. And then I was watching this is maybe a video like 5 years ago, but Chamath, who's a fairly famous investor, he's also on he has a podcast, All In Podcast. But he basically in this video is saying that, it's like you have a Series A, Series B, right, Series C. So if you get in at Series A, say you do a valuation of $100 million, then you sell it to the people at Series D when it's a valuation of, I don't know, $1 billion.
Make no mistake. You are. I'm out because I sold. But you guys are in the middle of an enormous multivariate kind of Ponzi scheme, and so. Let me explain that to you because it's important for you to understand. You get courted by investors, okay? These are not people writing checks out of their own balance sheet. They're doing a job with other people's money. And for that, they get one thing that's obvious, which is a yearly fee. And then something that's non-obvious, which is a part of the gains if what you do works. Okay, right? Everybody understands that? That's how a fund that invests in you works. That fund is getting paid fees every year and then carry at the back end if it works. Okay? They come to you. They're like, we want to partner with you. You're the best. We're going to help. You're so awesome. Have a fleece vest. It has our logo on it. You know, we backed blah, blah, blah company. You know, right? That's sure. That's the basic, that's the pitch. So you say yes. And then they give you, I'm just going to make up a number, $1 million. Then you go to your first board meeting. How fast are you growing? How many of you have had these discussions? How fast are you growing? Okay, grow faster. How many of you have had that discussion? Grow faster. Okay, most of you that raised your hand. Well, it would probably shock you to know that almost 40 cents of every venture dollar right now goes right back into the hands of Google, Facebook, and Amazon.
I think most people would be pretty surprised to realize that Zillow, Eventbrite, Uber, all the companies we just named have never made a profit, or if they did, it was like for a quarter. And you could probably say there was some accounting trickery to even be that way. They could send out a press release like, oh yeah, Uber finally had a profitable quarter, when they probably just moved some numbers around to even just be able to bust out that saying anyways.
Yeah. So yeah, there are a few things to say about that. So first, investors can still make money from an unprofitable company, right? Because you can sell your shares to others, get out early enough, and when you sell your shares to others, it's because these others believe they're going to be able to sell them for even more in the future. Right. So it's about a perception of the future profitability of your transaction. Right. So in theory, the price of stock of a company should reflect a belief of future profits, right? Real profits. But, in practice, you could achieve the same result if people believe in a future profit. Right. So if you make everyone believe in future profitability, if you actually try to do that, to optimize for that, again, in theory, that should coincide with the actual possibility of, making profits. But maybe in practice, it doesn't happen so much. So if you exaggerate a little bit about future prospects and you convince people this is going to work, they will potentially buy your shares of an unprofitable company, and you will make a profit at that point, which is what a lot of VCs do. Over the past few years, in the tech sector, the companies that go public, I think about 85% of them are unprofitable, right? In the 80s, that was 15% in the tech sector. It was crazy to imagine that you would go public and sell your shares in the New York Stock Exchange or in another, like in NASDAQ. You would be unprofitable at that point. People thought you need to have a very solid business in order to, and that means a profitable business in order for me to buy your shares. So this is to say the tech sector is organized at the moment around selling and buying shares of businesses that promise to become profitable in the future. So that being said, there's another thing I want to say about this, that this does make sense in certain cases. So when a business has the possibility to build a moat or a competitive advantage, which means that this business will capture a portion of the market and it will be very, very hard for anyone to take that market away from them. This is called a competitive advantage. I like to use the word moat for this. When your business has the possibility to do that, and I can give you a couple of examples, but then it makes sense to grow it at all costs and lose money in the process. Because in the future, the day you turn off the switch, the growth switch, and stop spending so much money on growth, then you will make really good profits compared to the money you put in, right? And then it will be worth it growing at a loss. So this is what these people are selling you when they say this business is unprofitable, but it's okay. What they're doing is they're kind of subsidizing the growth of the business. It's not unprofitable and static. It's unprofitable but growing. And they tell you this is going to pay off because the day we make a profit, it's going to be great, right? The thing is, I feel like a lot of people, or the topic of the moat isn't spoken about enough. I had a few discussions about this with people lately. Sometimes they even tell me things like, this is capitalism. Everybody wants to grow, and it's fine. Everybody wants to grow. There's nothing special. But I don't agree with that. So again, you want to grow really quickly with other people's money, with but getting billions from investors. We're talking really large numbers when you believe that it's going to pay off. If I have a bakery and I say I want to expand it into a chain of bakeries around the city, give me $1 billion, you're going to be like, nope. So there needs to be a really good reason for that. And that reason is this moat. So I'll give you an example of a business with strong moat, and it's Booking.com. Booking.com grew very quickly by signing up lots of small hotels that weren't part of the chains, and they went to great lengths to do that. And the rationale was, if every hotel, even the smallest one, is on Booking.com, then we will kind of lock users and hotels into our platform, right? Because it will be the place to go to book a holiday, because that's where all the hotels are, and that's where all the travelers are, which is called the network effect. This is the marketplace kind of effect. Amazon enjoys the same thing. And as a hotel, you can even get some, I don't remember the name, but you can make like a badge of honor sort of thing. Like, I'm a special hotel on Booking.com, but only if you're exclusive to Booking.com. So the competitor, let's say I try to create a new platform for hotels, and I approach a hotel and tell them, do you want to list your hotel in my platform that has no users? Then they're going to be like, no, because I'm going to lose my badge of honor with Booking.com. And that's how they've managed to keep this very strong moat. And you can actually measure a moat by looking at the ROE of a business, the return on equity, which is something nobody seems to speak about. A lot of people use other metrics to assess the performance. But I do recommend you to look at the ROE, which is what is the profit that the business makes divided by the money that has been put into the business by investors externally. So every year, how much money does the business generate with respect to what you put into the business, right? If you invest in real estate, you expect about 3% maybe. That's kind of what real estate yields to an investor. If you invest generically across the stock market by buying an index fund, you tend to get 10%, 10, 12%, right? That's the average of, the doing business, let's say. Booking.com returns like 30%, right? And the reason for that is this moat. Imagine a line of business where you can return 30% instead of 10%. Everybody would go in. They would be like, I'm going to put my money to do the same. And that would create a race to the bottom in terms of, prices of the service they provide, and then profits would go down, and then it would be kind of equalized to 10%. The reason that doesn't happen with Booking.com is the moat. That's why other people cannot, they can't just go and create another Booking.com. So the profitability with respect to the money that was put into the business is really high, right? What tech businesses want to do is imitate this. The problem is that a lot of them don't have this moat or even a possibility to build one. And yeah, maybe you could find a moat somehow, but sometimes it's really, really far-fetched, right? And I think people are not talking enough about this, right? Because a business like WeWork, they pictured it like as if it was this kind of business that's going to generate a huge profit with respect to the money you put in, hence it's super fast growth with subsidizing its costs, right? But with investors' money for years. But it was a real estate business. The day they turned the switch off, this growing with subsidies from others, they would have to increase the prices of renting office space, and people would be shopping around. They'll be like, do I want a WeWork or another one? There was no moat, right? And they tried to create a fake moat through a network effect where they said, we're going to be a sort of physical social network, right? Saying that nobody's going to be able to compete against WeWork because we offer this kind of connecting people, connecting freelancers with one another, or, but it was very, very weak. People already, they go to pubs after work and they socialize there, physical social networks already exist. So my point is here that it does sometimes make sense to grow with other people's money really quickly. You capture a portion of the market, nobody takes it away from you, and then you make a high ROE. I don't think that's the case with a lot of the tech businesses that pretend that they're going to do that.
You mentioned Booking.com in your book. You talk about Booking.com as a successful startup, right? But then you have the opposite. What is the worst one, though? I mean, you talked about Lime, the e-bike scooters, about how Lime came in and then all of a sudden all these other e-bike scooters came in and then they just eroded each other's profits. For me, reading the book, I thought the funniest one was probably the Juicero example.
I think that's the funniest one. A lot of people have spoken about this. So Juicero is this company that wants to actually build this juice pressing machine that it produced just, let's say, orange juice. And it used capsules like an espresso machine. But the machine itself costs like $700. And each capsule costs like $7. And people could just squeeze the capsule with their hands and produce the juice. So it didn't make any sense commercially. And here, what's going on is that investors are kind of hoping that some sort of miracle will happen, right? Did you use Juicero to produce that glass of juice? Yeah. Do you have Juicero, a Juicero machine at home? No. So it's a comical example of a very, look, I would call it a stupid investment if you want. But this is something that happens with the VC world, that they don't let you call anything stupid, because every criticism of a product that doesn't make sense is dismissed because it's an experiment. So they're going to tell you, look, Airbnb, they didn't start doing what they do now. They were doing something else and then they pivoted and they became really successful. So every criticism is dismissed that way. Juicero, it could have been the new Nespresso. They tell you, nobody imagined Nespresso would be so successful. What if Juicero is successful? So it's very hard to say that anything is stupid. And this is also related to the power law. Investors want to actually invest in things that if they succeed, they are very, surprised about this success. That's how you buy shares cheaply of a company. So if it succeeds, you make a really good profit from it. But I think Juicero is a very, very good example of a ridiculous startup. They had to lower the price from 700 to like 350, I think, and people were still not buying the product, right? So I think that was a good example of a failure. Another one was Quibi, this company that failed within 6 months, and it received 1.8 billion from investors. Their plan was to build this sort of Netflix-like platform to show videos that were very short, but made by A-list celebrities. So you would watch this almost TikTok video kind of thing, but with Julia Roberts in it. And the founders were very well-known people. I think it was the former CEO of DreamWorks and stuff like that. And they got almost 2 billion in funding from investors in one go. And they spent 1 billion of it on creating videos, but they never validated the idea with an audience. They never took a test audience to see if this made sense, if people would, because you would normally do that, right? Like, hey, let's see how it goes. They spent 1 billion on creating content, and then nobody liked it. So people were, they kind of partially blamed it on COVID, because they said we released this in the middle of the pandemic, so people weren't commuting that much, so they weren't interested in watching videos. But at the same time, TikTok just, expanded at that point. So another, I think, epic fail in terms of a startup investment.
One of the themes of the book was basically, it seems like The people that always win in the VC space are essentially just the VCs. Like sometimes maybe consumers will win if they create some amazing product, but that amazing product is probably not very often. You know, like the reason we have these hype cycles is from the VCs. They create these hype cycles. We'll get to AI in a little bit, and we'll do kind of a part two to your book, Smart, Intelligent, Dumb, Why Artificial Intelligence Keep Making Epic Mistakes. But one of the stories I thought was interesting in your book was you're basically talking about how they have these founder boot camps where like these VCs will get together and put these people in a room, and it's like, okay, like even though you guys don't have any idea of a product that you want to create or have any intimate knowledge of an industry, we're just going to put together people in a room. You guys kind of like do these challenges. Again, it goes back to treating these people like kids again. And then I'll come poof, we'll have these founders. But you can kind of talk. And you said you were part of one of these as well. So you got firsthand.
I was part of one of these programs. It works a little bit like a reality TV show. It was a lot of fun. And I met amazing people. You know, it was really, really good. I made very good connections. So this is a new trend in the VC world. So what they do is they say, okay, instead of investing in existing companies, we're going to run a program where we pull really good people, founder material, right? That's what they say. Let's put founder material in a room for weeks. And then they try to follow a process or a recipe to have these people come up with ideas, problems they would like to solve. The people in this program usually don't have an idea of a product they want to build or a problem they want to solve. That's actually even discouraged. They tell you what matters is the people. You want a strong team together. The problem, you don't care so much. You can always, switch to another problem if needed. And the idea is that they make you kind of compete, to at the end of the program, come up with a very strong team and a tentative problem and get money for it. They give you about, $100K, I would say. So it's not a lot of money. So they give you initially like $100K to build a prototype of your product in exchange for, let's say, 10% of your business. So that's how it operates. It's a very early stage VC. And their idea is to churn out as many companies as you can. One of them has produced 100 new startups this way. My reservation with this is that, well, I don't think it's working actually, right? They're not really producing businesses that are then exiting. They're not selling them they don't become profitable. I met a lot of founders that launched businesses this way, and most of them have, failed very quickly. But I think it's this idea again of the recipe. Just so we have the agile recipe. Now they're trying to industrialize innovation, right? Just follow the recipe, put people in a room, play games. Again, there's this gamification of everything. They make you play games, like make a funny video as a group to see how you get along, to try to form teams. So there's all this sort of stuff. And then try to come up with an idea. Think about your day, they tell you. Think about when you wake up in the morning, what do you do? Is there a problem you have? From the moment you're brushing your teeth, is there something you would like to solve? But look, there's also another thing I've observed over the past few years. I've been speaking with a lot of successful entrepreneurs over the past few months. And they tend to be people who knew a domain very well. And they knew what was missing, but other people had overlooked this, from the outside. So they know what's missing. Nobody else knows. And then they build a business to solve that problem. And because they know the field very well, they have clients very early on, sometimes even before releasing the product, because they have buyers. People are desperate to solve this problem. And they become, very successful, not billionaires. They don't build unicorns, but they build companies that don't need external funding because they become profitable very quickly so they can self-fund their own growth. And this is the recipe that, to me, that works. And these programs, it's the opposite thing. You don't need any domain expertise. Just, you're going to figure something out. Just do some research, do some interviews with people to see, what's going on. So to me, it's the opposite from what actually works. And the idea of these VCs is that people like, the people who launched Airbnb had nothing to do with hospitality. They didn't know anything about that. And they built a unicorn. But that almost never happens. That's not, I've spoken with a lot of people, and I haven't met many people who actually made that work. So these programs are kind of, I think this idea that it's like a meat grinder. You just put the founders in the meat grinder, you crank the handle, and then startups will come out the other end, and a few of them will be successful. Yay. I think that's the approach. And I think it's very funny, the things I've seen, I don't think it tends to work very well. And some VC funds, they're even trying, they're called startup factories now. They're trying to create their own companies, which they fully own, instead of doing this. But there's a whole tendency now to move toward this, very early stage. Let's create lots of businesses, a lot of trial and error, and they're hoping that at one point something will work.
It's kind of interesting, though, the example you gave about how the founders of Airbnb didn't have any experience in the hospitality industry, and you get the same thing would be true of, say, Travis Kalanick, of the founder of Uber, didn't have any experience in the taxi industry, but neither one of those companies to this day are still profitable, though. Like, that's the thing, right? Yeah. The only people that made money on it were the VCs, and of course, probably the founders through their stock, but they're still unprofitable. Like, is that really a successful story?
I mean, obviously there are some successful stories that happens, but I think there's also a lot of survivorship bias. And there's also another thing that happens a lot, that is that the messaging is that let's say that the VC firms at the top, or even the VC funds at the very top of performance, the top 25%, that's what they call it the top quartile of performance. They do really well. Look how much they've made. Because sometimes it works, right? But my problem with that is that you are picking that 25% after the fact. So if you go around a building and you pick the 25% tallest people, they're going to be very tall. You can say, look, in this building, the top 25% taller people are on average 6'2". Yeah, okay, obviously, because you pick them, because this would be if performance persisted. So let's say a VC firm, somehow they launch a fund and it's at the very top. And then their next fund is also at the very top. And the next one is also at the very top. Then you could say, well, there exists a strategy that some people know, that there are funds that actually manage to exploit this power law. They actually manage to tip the odds in their favor. But the numbers show that this isn't quite happening. So performance does persist a little bit. So they have a slightly higher chance of the next fund being at the top if the previous one was at the top. A little bit. But then it fades away. And even that higher performance, some people say maybe it's because when a fund does well, it has access to more deals because it became famous. It's not necessarily because they found a winning strategy, right? So this whole idea, again, you're going to see a lot of people telling you, look how much money this firm has made, or look how much money the 25% make. And yeah, but as an investor, if I'm an LP, I want to give my money to VCs. What are the chances that my money is going to land on a VC that actually makes me that money back? And the chances aren't very good. So that's the thing.
So in your book, you talk about ZIRP, or the basically 0% interest rates. And I think it really started, at least in the US, after the dot-com boom, or dot-com crash, whatever you want to say. And then, of course, you also had the housing crash. Yeah, the 2008 housing crash.
Yeah, ZIRP started in 2008.
Right. So, so ZIRP really went crazy in 2008. Yeah. So you basically had this money that you weren't going to get a return if you put it into, more of your traditional safe assets. So you were chasing yield, like you say in the book, or chasing alpha, whatever bullshit jargon you want to use from Wall Street to make it sound a lot more complicated than it really is.
Yeah. The goal by design of ZIRP, and I quote in the book, the Bank of England saying this officially, right, is we want fund managers to divert money from safe investments to risky ones, because we've lowered the return on safe investments. That it was engineered to be that way, right? And let's make them put money into riskier investments. And a lot of people have told me, this is a lot of what happened. A lot of people gave money to venture capitalists because they were chasing yield. When they allocate a portfolio to different kinds of investments, they decide to, shift it toward riskier kinds of investments. So yeah, I think there was definitely a lot of that based on what I've heard. And one thing that's fascinating about ZERP, and all the quantitative easing, all those policies, is that when you look at standard economic theory, mainstream economics, nobody sees a problem of kind of artificially lowering interest rates. They just say it activates innovation, right? People will invest more in risky ventures. And that kind of makes sense if you think that all these decisions are, rational and they all work well. And I would like to do even some research on this in the future. I don't think VCs are irrational necessarily. I don't think they take that money and they allocate it irrationally in the sense that it goes against their own goals. I just think that their rational outcome, as we said earlier, might be to overinvest because they can get that 2% fee, right? So I think they could, strange incentives can cause bad investments with this money. And a lot of people have said that because there was a period of low interest rates, not zero like in ZERP, right? But low interest rates before the 2008 crisis, right? So the housing boom was partially caused by low interest rates. It was very easy to borrow money. And then what some people have said is when the crash happened, the solution they found was to prescribe basically another even lower interest rates. So it seems like the solution is to go lower and lower until they became zero interest rates. And at one point it was negative interest rates in some places in Europe, which is even hard to imagine. But it's almost like I have a hot potato in my hands. I can't have any liquid money. I need to invest it, or else I lose it. But they did. They incentivized risk taking. What we saw with the latest tech boom was part of it. What happened in 2022, which is when the tech sector crashed dramatically. One of the reasons of the crash, which is when investment went down by a lot, was that interest rates went up. We're talking from almost 0% to like 4.5%, all of a sudden. So people stopped giving money to VC, right? So interest rates do affect how much money is invested into tech startups for sure. Yeah. What's missing maybe in current theories, this is, very wild guess. I think we may want to assess the real effect of this, right? Maybe it's not just people using that money wisely to invest to invest in a way that makes economic sense for everyone.
9 months ago, you and I did a podcast based on your book, Smart Until It's Dumb, talking about AI. And the podcast, I believe, was titled something like AI's Bullshit. And, 9 months later, so kind of a follow-up on it. But basically, in the last 10 years, just in the United States alone, there's about $330 billion has been invested into AI. And Goldman Sachs came out with a report this month in July 2024, basically saying that it's expected that there'll be, in the next decade, there'll be over $1 trillion invested in generative AI. And, I think we talked last time about Sam Altman, the founder of CEO of OpenAI, I think said like within 10 years, like 75% of jobs would be automated by AI, replaced, whatever. And in this Goldman Sachs critique, they estimate that less than 5% of tasks will be cost effective to automate with AI in the next decade. And they also believe that the boost to the GDP over the next decade will be less than 1%. And it's interesting because a lot of the comments, I see people that write comments on that video, and it's like, this video is not even a year old and you're already wrong. I assume they watched like 30 seconds of the video and they just wanted to leave a comment. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm like, are you sure? I mean, right now we just had ChatGPT 4.0 released recently. And like, I don't know. I mean, I feel like ChatGPT 4.0 will probably be the default model for the next decade. I mean, is this like the big reveal? I don't know.
Yeah, a lot of people are disappointed. Yeah.
Right. So what do you got to say to this, Emmanuel?
So I think I stand by what I said before, maybe with different examples of AI's failures and stuff. But so what I've been saying for a while, and what's different from what people were saying until like a month ago, a lot of people assumed that there is a business case for all sorts of AI applications, right? I think, people are going to make money from LLMs, from large language models, from, this new type of AI. I think they're great. I think they're impressive, but I think there isn't a very solid business case in the sense that a lot of businesses, they say, I'm going to build a product based on an LLM and I will make a lot of money from it. And I don't think that's as obvious as they say, because LLMs hallucinate, right? They have all sorts of problems and we don't know how to fix hallucinations, right? We still don't know. So sometimes, a portion of the time, they output something that is completely outrageous, like a complete fabrication. There are a lot of applications where your client's going to hate you if you do this. You can't deploy a product that hallucinates. In some cases you can, okay? But it's not always. In fact, I think in a lot of applications, people are much more demanding than clients. I heard someone say the other day, and I don't remember if it was like B2B products or something like that. You can't deliver a product that works 85% of the time. It's, there's a Pareto law and everyone was saying, yes, that's good enough is good enough. But in reality, it's not. Air Canada a few months ago had to give a refund to a customer against its own terms because the chatbot lied about the policy when the customer service chatbot said this is the policy, but it wasn't true. And then when the customer applied to get this refund, they told him, oh no, the policy is actually different. And a judge ordered that they should honor the refund. And then they decommissioned the chatbot. At least it's no longer there. A lot of these things are happening. So I have been saying for a while, I don't see this obvious money-making machine that AI is supposed to be. And when it comes to jobs, I don't think it will replace as many jobs as we think, or as a lot of people say. It will replace some jobs, and we already see that happening. But a lot of jobs take a lot more to do than what people think, right? So they say AI will replace, copywriters. It will replace journalists. It will replace writers. It will replace software engineers. But they've never met a software engineer to know what it actually takes to do the job. Because it's not about writing snippets of code. It's often about understanding your client, about prioritizing things, finding a good architecture, securing what you do. So it's not just, it's not what ChatGPT can do. And because it hallucinates, you will probably still need the engineer anyway to validate the output. So you have this new tool that makes you a bit faster when you code, sometimes for very simple tasks. The rest of the time, it doesn't add so much value, but you still need to be around. So how is this going to change? How is this going to increase GDP enormously? So I think that the business case is not very strong for AI, right? And until like a month ago, everybody was telling me the opposite. It was like, everyone's going to make money. Everybody's like, I've seen startups already complain. They come to me and they say, look, I built this and it's hallucinating. Or sometimes it's just outputs things in an inconsistent way, or I can't really release it, or my customers are complaining. So how do I fix this? How do I fix the hallucination? I'm like, you may be able to mitigate them, but I'm not sure you're going to eliminate them. I've also met people who, because it's all about natural language, right? LLMs are about, I type in what I want and I get a response in natural language. They discover that that's not what their clients want. When you search for a holiday, do you really want to be typing in, I would like to go to France. Tell me a place that would be nice to go to. Right? I don't think that's how people want to interact with machines. You just want to put in a box, I want to go to from New York to Paris on this date. Sometimes you don't want an interaction in terms of natural language. So I think there are lots of problems in terms of business case. But everybody was telling me, oh no, it's going to be great. There will be mass unemployment, but the GDP will increase by a lot, and a lot of people will become 10 times more productive. And I'm like, how? And what Goldman Sachs has just said, and it's one of the first ones, it's okay, maybe not. They're starting to acknowledge that maybe this is not going to happen. right? So I think what they're trying to say there is the business case is not necessarily there, or not in the way people thought, So yeah, I think it kind of validates what I've been saying for a while.
Yeah, I think I was reading reports that ChatGPT spends $700,000 a day just to operate it. And of course, they're not profitable as well. And eventually, if you become unprofitable quarter after quarter after quarter, usually that becomes a bankrupt.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to have a viable business model
exactly.
at some point.
I think, when I spoke about moats are a competitive advantage. What I argue in the book is that a technological superiority, it doesn't build a moat. The fact that you have good technology doesn't build a moat because other people can copy it. So then you start competing on price. So you kind of need to capture your market in a different way. And just today, because ChatGPT, so OpenAI has released this GPT-4 Omni Mini. So it's a small version and it's really cheap. I already heard some people say, okay, they're very cheap now. That's because there's pressure to lower prices because you have Gemini, you have so many models out there. There's some open source models. You got this company Mistral in France also delivering LLMs. Everybody's building their own LLM. So they have started to compete on price. When that happens, the margin goes down. And then you don't obtain this ROE that I was speaking about earlier. So will all of this investment into OpenAI work out well if they charge very little for their products in the future, right? Because they had to compete on price against other companies. And yeah, they're spending a lot of money every day to perform calculations with their models, but also to develop new models. Their highly promised GPT-5 still hasn't been released, which has been disappointing for a lot of people. And they have stronger competitors now. So I don't know if there's even a business case for OpenAI itself. Or you know what? A business case that justifies all the money that people have put into it, right? Because they are building a cool product, right? But will it make sense from a business point of view? I don't know.
You kind of gave me a weird face when I mentioned that the U.S. has invested about $330 billion into AI. Do you think that number is wrong? I mean, what was the reason for that?
I understood you said million, and I thought this is...
Oh, did I say million? Oh, okay.
I don't know. Maybe I misheard. Yeah.
I was like, we'll go back. Yeah. If I said million now, it's 330 billion. Of course, I'll be using AI to replace the word million with billion if I did make it. So maybe no one will know, because I've seen people say that it was like $1 trillion, but the report that I read from Goldman Sachs was saying that there will be $1 trillion and maybe in the future, but in the future.
In 2021, there were over 600 billion invested by VCs into tech startups, right? 600 billion. So it's not too far from $1 trillion. And now the gold rush is in AI, right? So I wouldn't be surprised if that's the sum. I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah. Someone said it was the last attempt, or like a desperate attempt to make the VC industry or Silicon Valley survive after what happened in 2022, which is when, everybody got fired and investment ran really low. So they say AI is like the last attempt. I think it's an article on the New York Times that said that. We'll see how it goes.
So speaking of ChatGPT and AI, I mean, I've basically been reading reports that there's no more training data. Like all the training data that they could possibly use to train these large language models has been used. And then, of course, that doesn't even get into the ethical, where they're basically stealing data and privacy concerns and things like that. And so they're saying, to get to the ChatGPT-5, there's just not even enough data. Anyway, are we kind of at the point where ChatGPT 4.0 is going to be as good as it gets for the foreseeable future?
I think we're already seeing diminishing returns for sure. And in terms of the data, a lot of data has been used. I read this article that said, it was a research article saying that at this rate, very soon, we will have used a database of the same size as all of the available text, or publicly available text out there, which means that we've exhausted public sources of data. And that is a problem because training LLMs is very data hungry. So you need a lot of data. And there's another research article that showed that if you want to make a linear improvement of an LLM at a certain task, you need exponentially more data about that task with examples of how to do that task, right? Which means that it's not a very effective use of data. If you want, you need quite a lot of data. And the problem with AI is with edge cases, with things that don't happen very often, with questions that aren't asked very frequently. So how are we ever going to have enough data for that when we've already almost exhausted publicly available data, right? Yeah, you could have private data potentially added, but that's not very scalable. You could have manually created data specifically, which they are already doing. So the way they're trying to align ChatGPT to the user's goal, which is, I want an appropriate response. Don't say anything, inadequate or stuff like that. It's by creating manual examples. They also doing it, or they improve it at certain tasks by, they have an army of people who create examples of desired outputs by hand, right? But you can only do that on common things, common questions. It's not scalable either. So the bottleneck in terms of data will probably be reached very soon. If it hasn't, if we're not there yet. And obviously the question of obtaining that data, that's another issue, right? Because they didn't gather that data with permission from the authors of the data, right? Which is another issue here, right? So they just collected a lot of data from the internet. There's a database of books that were, pirated. So like hundreds of thousands of books. And that was used to train those systems. So yeah, in addition to that, they face issues at, gathering more data because of copyright problems that may make it even harder, right? And I think the problem with LLMs is not only about the data. There's also potentially something in the way they're designed that causes these hallucinations or doesn't let them be fully smart. If you want it, Jan LeCun, which is one of the fathers, if you want, of deep learning, he invented this technique called convolutional neural network, which is very popular in image analysis with AI. So he's been saying this. He's been saying LLMs, for instance, LLMs are all about words. They're designed to process text. But when humans think, we don't always speak to ourselves, right? Sometimes we think about the physical location of objects in our minds without putting words on that, right? So we don't necessarily reason the same way. In addition, LLMs follow a fixed number of steps in order to produce an output. But when we think, we adapt the efforts depending on the difficulty of the task, right? If something's really difficult, we spend more time and more effort trying to perform that task. So it seems that the way LLMs work at the moment are not necessarily that thing that's going to take us to AGI, artificial general intelligence. So it's not necessarily just about the data, and it could be also about the technique. We need a different technique.
We were talking earlier about what was the worst startup idea. We mentioned Juicero. I was actually thinking, maybe the worst one in the book though was actually the company that stole airlines from other airlines. And is that what was that?
Tell me a bit more about the example so I can see what you're talking
like
about.
You'd have the app, like you book a flight, then you find a cheaper one at another flight.
Oh yeah, yeah.
The reason it's the worst is as a user, maybe it'd be beneficial, but the reason it's the worst is because why would any of the companies, any of the airlines, agree to give that data away?
Yeah, so the context of this in the book is the topic of free money, right? That's another thing in the book, which is that governments do give a lot of money to startups that they don't need to ever give back. It's a grant. You apply. So governments want to say, we support innovation, right? So we create this program where people can apply and we're going to give them money, right? We have them here in the UK, for instance. There's this program, they give a few million every quarter to startups. And I used to work for a company where we applied for, to obtain one of these grants for free money. And the point I make in the book is that the idea was pretty obviously flawed. yet we got the money from the government. So the idea was we're going to build a system that for airlines that when a passenger, for airlines and passengers, but if a flight appears that is, so when a passenger has the intention of buying, they're like, oh, I want to buy this flight. The system will search for, or will tell other airlines, hey, this client is looking to buy this flight. Do you have a better offer? Right? So I go to American Airlines and I'm searching for my flight, and then Delta finds out that I'm looking for a flight from New York to London, and they can make an offer. I kind of steal, my business away from American Airlines, right? So that was the plan. Yeah, it's great. We're gonna, be able to kind of have this auction sort of system or bidding for passengers. But which airline will ever sign up to this? Like, no airline wants to let other airlines that they have a certain they want that passenger to themselves. And the proof is also that airlines don't even let you change the name on a ticket. You can't just buy a ticket and then transfer it to someone else. They want to really, really have you once you buy a ticket. So to me, and the reason I chose that story in the book is that the idea was, it's an idea, right? But the idea has an obvious flaw, pretty obvious. But we told the story so nicely in our proposal that the government they gave us money. It wasn't much, but they gave us money to do more research about it, to kind of, get us started with the product, like a bit of seed money. And it was fascinating. I think one of the reasons was that the government is also ticking boxes, right? They want to say, we have supported this many startups helping with sustainability. For instance, we heard that one of the major goals of the government with this program was related to the environment. So what I did in my application was to say that we will help airlines fill up their seats. Airplanes will fly with fewer empty seats thanks to us. So we will make flying greener. But I don't know if I should be, proud or horrified that I managed to pull this off, but I did it in a delicate way because it couldn't sound like an obvious suck up kind of thing, saying that. So I just put that as one of the benefits among all of the other benefits of this amazing software that we would build. But that let, some bureaucrat probably tick the box of, oh yeah, sustainable, yay, right? And again, it's about incentives because these agencies, what they want is to say that they have helped lots of startups, right? They don't necessarily care about them being successful. Probably by the time you know whether the company was successful, there's a new administration, by then in the government. So, and there was an interesting incident regarding all this, was that I was doing some research on this free money program they have here in the UK. And I wanted to know if anybody had assessed the impact of this program, and what people who plan for this kind of stuff, what they tell you is that what these programs do is support projects that wouldn't happen otherwise, right? If the government gives money to a startup that would have still obtained investment from somebody else privately, that's not a good thing because we were basically having the taxpayer foot the bill for something that privately, that could have been privately funded. And the startup doesn't even have to pay that money back, right? It's a grant, it's just free money. So, they say we do this for new projects that wouldn't take place, right? And there's this website, this webpage, government webpage that says this is how many new jobs have been created thanks to our program. These are how many new companies have been created, like additional. They use this wording, right? And they cited these things from a report that came from a consulting company. They hired a consulting company externally to assess their program. And I was like, I want to see how they calculated this. I've been a researcher in the past. I'm very, very, well trained now to see where, if results are a bit shady in the way they're obtained. On this website, there's a link to this PDF with the result, but the link isn't working. It's kind of broken, right? And I tried to find the file and I can't. So I made a request through their Freedom of Information channel, and they rejected it. They literally told me, sorry, we're not going to share that, but the program was highly successful. And I was like, that's very, very strange. So I finally obtained a copy of the report that someone shared with me, and I went through the report. And it was well done. So the research from this consulting company is actually pretty sensible, but the results were quite bad. So they show that a lot. They did interviews with the people who got money from the government for this program, and a large portion of them said that we would have done this anyway without the government money, right? A lot of them, which is the opposite from what you want in those programs, right? So yeah, the results weren't very good, and I think maybe that's, I don't want to be too cynical, but maybe that's why they didn't want to share the report and they just cherry picked a few things. But yeah, I was a bit surprised about. I don't know if I was surprised, to be honest, but it was very interesting to see this, the results of these, giving free money to companies.
I mean, it seemed like one of the major themes of the book was basically like, if you want to get money from VCs, if you're a founder, you essentially have to have some like moonshot. You're talking about like the example of the company or like an airport that had GPS put into like vehicles and various things that have wheels so they can track where they're at around the airport, where that's not going to be some $100 billion market. So they're not really going to get any VCs to invest in it anyway. So you have to have like this, like you call it, the miracles. And then like in like Dennis Felix's book, he basically is like, if you're a founder, the last thing you should do is take money from a VC because it comes with strings. And then you kind of mentioned in the book how the VC could be kind of the lender or they could be a partner depending on how it goes. If it goes bad, they're the lender. They're clawing their money back. If it goes good, well, they're the partner. And then you said that like basically, I think it's like after like 3 years, 50% of founders are pushed out of their own company. And I believe it was after 5 years, over 75% of founders are pushed out. And you said usually if they're pushed out, it doesn't mean that they're doing bad. It actually means that they're doing good. So you push out the CEO, insert yourself, and kind of reap more of the benefits. And it just seemed like the VC space is fairly scammy, but because they have so much money, they're really able to give themselves really good PR and a lot of these hype cycles and whatnot and just like we're seeing it with Adam Newman at WeWork. I mean, was it Andreessen Horowitz, whatever, gave him like $300 million to create Flow, which is essentially the exact same business model as WeWork, but instead of commercial real estate, it's like residential real estate.
So I would say, first of all, the idea of supporting innovators, I have nothing against that. That's what VCs are supposed to do, right? Let's help a person who has a great idea, and they need money for it, but they can't obtain it in a traditional way. Banks are not going to give them money, right? So supporting innovators, that's great. And there are definitely some VCs that do that for sure, but then there's also this formulaic thing of VCs trying to find or follow a recipe to win, when I don't think they're doing that very well. You can call it scammy. I think, that's a very strong word. So I'm not going to say that, but you do get a feeling of, I've spoken with VCs and I've seen how, sometimes it's very hard to argue against them because they're very accomplished people, so sometimes you meet a VC, they had a business, it went very well, they made a lot of money from it, and now they work in this field of investing other people's money, but then you realize that the business they built had nothing to do with AI, but now they're making decisions about AI and have opinions about AI, right? And they're like, even I was at a meeting with a VC, we were discussing a business idea, and he said it wasn't AI related, the product, but he was like, please, you need to say this is AI related somehow. You need to sneak in the word AI because others are going to love it. Other VCs are going to love it. So I have seen a lot of them also make what seemed like silly decisions to me. Obviously, you can disguise it as, it's the moonshot, the power law, blah, blah, blah. But they are Juicero-like, decisions. And I've seen them give money to people that had no idea what they're doing, and the ideas had obvious flaws. right? And I don't know if they overlook the flaws. They know about them, but they just don't think it's important because the company will pivot, or they just don't do enough research, But yeah, I see this contradiction, On the one hand, you have these very accomplished people, but then you don't necessarily see them from then on, using money wisely, or necessarily, understanding very well what they're investing on. So yeah, I think there's a lot of that. Yeah.
You mentioned Charlie Munger in your book a couple of times. He was Warren Buffett's partner, business partner. Mm-hmm. I think he died. Was it this year?
Yeah.
But anyways, like they always talked about kind of your circle of competence, and like these VCs, they're investing in all sorts of things. You're not going to be an expert in AI, and then to be an expert in the nutrition of Juicero or whatever. How this, they have just so many different things. That was Warren Buffett's thing. It's like I could have made him more money, but at the same time, he would have lost. Investing in companies, he has no idea what's going on.
Yeah. And also we should remember the incentives, right? Because, in addition to trying to invest as much money as they can because they get this 2% commission, the other way of making money is by selling shares of the companies they invest in the future. But because most of them are not profitable, you need to create the impression, right? Or the belief that they will be profitable one day. And it almost looks like at some point there's like a circular kind of deals, happening, and because VCs investing into each other, which raises the valuation, and it's a lot about the appearance of success. And that's why I've spoken with VCs where it seems like a lot of it is about the appearance of we need to invest in AI because everyone is speaking about AI, because they always want to increase the valuation of the company, the apparent value of the company, which is often calculated based on how another investor in the future, how much they pay for the shares. They all speak about valuation. I've heard people speak of the success of a startup based on how much its valuation increased, right? In theory, if the valuation represented the true value of the company, that would be okay. But I'm not sure that's okay, right? Just the perceived value of the company, does it tell me if the company is actually successful? Will it actually become profitable one day, right? I'm not sure. The valuation is the decision that a person made when they bought shares of a company, right? It's not necessarily directly connected with its true value, right? So I think that there are a few, incentive issues potentially.
So today's guest has been Dr. Emmanuel Maggiori, who is the author of the new book, Siliconed: How the Tech Industry Solves Fake Problems, Hoards Idle Workers, and Makes Doomed Bets with Other People's Money. So, Emmanuel, where can people find your book, get a hold of you, that kind of information? And then secondly, just leave us with a final thought related to your new book, maybe your book, Smart Until It's Dumb, your AI book, or just what's on your mind in general.
Yeah. Here's the book, Silicon. I don't know if it will be. You will see it. You can find it anywhere where you buy books, like Amazon or Barnes & Noble. If you type Silicon on Amazon, as of today, it will try to correct you and say silicone or, something like that. So maybe you need to type like Silicon and my name or Silicon book, and you will find it. And so a final thought. Look, my final thought, and what I find myself telling a lot of people lately, is that technology is cool and we need to use it to solve real problems. The most successful people I met lately have solved the real problem. They knew a field very well. They saw what was missing in the field, and they built a boring company to solve the problem. They didn't build a company to use blockchain to pilot your drone with AI. They solved the boring problem, and it was a lot of fun in the end because you have real clients that are using your product, which is fun. They are paying for it very, very early. So you can become profitable very early on, and you're not going to become a billionaire by doing this, but you might become a millionaire. You could build this kind of business and not need to work ever again, and I've met quite a lot of people like that of the past couple of years. And I think we should be focusing more on that and, try to see what's missing. Technology is terrible in some fields. They are very, very outdated in terms of technology. I've seen industries that still use a lot of paper to keep track of things, and then they lose this paper form. And, I've heard of things that still get done using fax machines in some companies. These industries need help from technologists. And I think we should focus a lot on that, because you can gain the satisfaction of solving a real problem, building a real product, making money in the process. That's my version of success, right? If you try to build this blockchain AI drone thing with, augmented reality goggles, you will get money from venture capitalists or from people who are going to give you money for it. And it's going to come with strings. You won't necessarily end up owning the company in the future or having a say in its decisions, and you're probably going to fail, right? So let's go back to boring, I think. Yeah, let's be boring. That's my last thought.
My dear friends, that is it for this episode of El Podcast. Once again, if you're not yet subscribed, please subscribe on YouTube as well as Rumble. You can also find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts from. We thank you all from the bottom of our hearts for watching and listening, and we will see you on the next episode.